tell us your story of really how you came to this very important work of leading men.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never aspired to talk to men about my 4 years in Sex Addicts Anonymous. I never aspired to talk to men about my insecurities and failings because I grew up like a lot of men do, which is don't show any weakness, have all the answers, be the top performer. So the quick and dirty is, I mean, and you two introduced me where I am today. Where I was before was I kind of grew up playing all the sports, one of the smartest kids in class, was a leader in fraternity in college. And then when I went on to the corporate financial services world, where I spent 15 years, I had a pretty successful career, made good money, was a leader in business, and hit some milestones a lot earlier than I thought I would. And in my best year ever, this was 2009, where the backdrop of the world was the Great Recession. Everything was like falling apart. I tripled my sales goal that year. I'd made more like life-changing money, bought this apartment that, I'm living in Manhattan. And with that contrast, I still was like, this is as good as it gets. Like it was a fleeting moment of success. And then I felt empty, restless, unsatisfied. And when I thought about the next 30 or 40 years of my life, it scared the shit out of me, which is what began my path on personal development. But where it really took off was the 3 years later in 2013, where I bottomed out, entered Sex Addicts Anonymous, which would have been shocking to anyone else in the rest of my world because they saw me as this perfectly presented, meticulously designed leader who said all the right things, did all the right things, who had integrity in his life. But behind the scenes, what I used to keep like the glue, the duct tape and glue that kept it all together to navigate my emotions, because I never learned how to navigate my emotions, was using sex and sexting and pornography anytime I felt bored, alone, frustrated, anxious. And through that journey of healing myself, I started to notice that I was having an impact on others. And the more that I talked to other men behind the scenes about it, the more I knew I needed to share my story. And that ultimately ended up, with me leaving the corporate world and then doing some of these more public things like a podcast, like masterminds that help men with all this stuff.
That's
Really,
amazing.
really beautiful stuff. Yeah. And I love that you mentioned integrity. It actually has to do with a magic trick that I'm going to give later in the show. But integrity is just this major part of what anyone, man or woman, I don't like to shit on, people really should be walking toward. That's what we're trying to do, is what we call remember.
That's what we're all craving in another.
Yeah. And well, at least the role model in another, right, is someone who is integral and has put their pieces back together, so to speak. So I'd love to go into that a little bit, just what that word integrity means to you as a man or for a man.
Yeah. I'm glad you went here with it. So integrity can be boiled down to you say what you're going to do and then you do what you say. Right. And also to have integrity, there needs to be a deeper understanding of what it is that you stand for. What are your values and what are your boundaries? And I would say that in all areas of my life, most areas of my life, I had integrity where I did what I said and I knew what my values were. It was this one area of sex where I was out of integrity all the time. Every time I would make a commitment to myself to say, I'm not going to masturbate today. And then maybe I would and then I would make it to like 9:00, but then I couldn't fall, or 10:00, and then I couldn't fall asleep. And I'm like, I need to go to bed. So I'm going to jerk off and go to bed.
Right.
I'm not going to watch porn because my girlfriend's coming over tonight. But then I would break that promise. And then eventually, as my compulsive behavior escalated, then it became, I would step out on my partner. It was the one area of my life where I couldn't maintain a boundary. And so that was paradoxical to me because I had discipline and willpower in all these areas. And I think a lot of men, I think a lot of people, period, have like an area of their life that just seems to be the most challenging to maintain and hold integrity, whether it's with work commitments, whether it's with food, whether it's with alcohol, drugs, these kinds of things. We all kind of have that one area that like we've been given as our biggest challenge in life. So I think the last piece I want to say on integrity is we constantly find ourselves out of integrity. It's just a matter of like, how do you name it? How do you own it? And then how do you restore integrity? And I think that's one of the things that doesn't get taught quite enough is how do you restore your integrity when you've been out of it? And one of the best examples I can give you too is I joined this relationship and intimacy program. It was a 9-month course with John Wineland.
Yeah.
He's amazing. And he's a disciple of David Data. And it's a mixed group, men and women, who come to practice like depth relationship intimacy. And every 2 weeks we have a Zoom call together. Now, I'm usually on top of my stuff. Like I have everything calendared, schedule. I'm never late, all that kind of stuff. Like I hold that value. There was this one week where I just completely forgot to calendar our event and then I missed it. And in the Facebook group, I did this 3-minute video apology. And this video apology, like I was trying to restore my integrity, but it was all about how busy I am, how like, this felt like how this fell through the cracks. I dropped too many plates. And the women in the group tore my head off. And they tore my head off because they're like, I don't want to hear how busy you are. How many men have told me that like they're busy all the time? I'm tired of that. And what they wanted to hear was my recognition of the impact that my absence may have had on the group, right? And to instead say, I'm sorry that I didn't show up and honor the commitment that I came here for. And the fact that you had counted on me to be here. And when I didn't show up, you couldn't practice with me. You don't know if you can count on me. That must suck for you. And also, what else came up for you? I'm here for it. Tell me. And when they taught me how to restore my integrity in that respect, I've been able to be out of integrity, come back and clean it up and move on.
That's really beautiful. It actually brings to mind someone we've had on the show, Michael Brody Waite.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah. He's recovering drug addict. He spent a lot of years in the 12-step program. And so I don't know if any of that same integrity building concept flows into Sex Addicts Anonymous that I know you're familiar with, but he broke down this process, and it's something that Jade and I use a lot in our own work with men. And it's basically 3 steps. It's to practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work. And I know a lot of that was based in that 12-step program. And that is an integrity building skill set, right? Like being able to see where you fucked up and then announce like, hey, I did this. I'm going to claim responsibility for this. Surrender the outcome of whatever that might look like, because being honest is really hard work. And you do have to surrender the outcome whenever you choose to be honest and be in integrity. And then do the uncomfortable work of picking up the pieces, or in your case, letting these women, bash into you and then tell you all the other things that this brought up for them in their life. So that's really such a beautiful example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk about how you took an 11-month break without sex or masturbation and just what that did for you. I know I took a 9-month celibacy, but I'm sure it's so different for a man than it is for a woman.
Yeah. Celibacy. Well, I can't speak to a woman's experience, but my goodness, this celibacy like truly changed my life. So to provide some context, ever since I stumbled upon this thing called masturbation at the age of 14, which was, most guys stumble upon masturbation, but without even knowing what the hell's going on. My parents left this movie, White Men Can't Jump, at home, right? Rosie Perez, right? Rosie Perez has no idea the dramatic role that she played in my sexual becoming. But my parents were like a very strict household. Like they never let me watch MTV, and they left this, like they made this one mistake, and I just jumped on it. And I remember watching that movie back and forth, and like that sex scene, and eventually I'm using the remote to rub my boner through my pants, and then bang, all of a sudden something happens. I had no idea. But in that moment at age 14, whatever it was my introduction into this powerful force, this almost like this unlimited supply of heroin that just kind of sat between my legs, and I could pull on that crank anytime I felt alone, frustrated, bored, like insecure. And believe me, I used that. And so I'm talking about being a 4 or 5 time a day kind of guy when I was like in my early teenage years. And then as it got into like my 20s and 30s, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day. Very rarely did I go a day without it, right? So you're talking like 20 years of consistent effort of sexual pleasure and release. And then I enter Sex Addicts Anonymous in 2013, in January of that year. And now I'm being told, I remember my first sex therapist was like, okay, we need to put you on a protocol of no sex, no masturbation, and no pornography. And I looked at him. And I was like, he must have just seen the deer in the headlights expression. He's like, what do you think? You're going to spontaneously combust? I'm like, yeah, I do. I mean, like here's my last 20 years, man. And you want me to go right to this cold turkey? And so it was a challenge. But during those 4 years of Sex Addicts Anonymous, I actually did not masturbate to ejaculation. There were times where I did masturbate, but I didn't ejaculate. So for 4 years of no porn. And then inside of that period of 4 years, there was that 11-month period, Jade, that you're talking about, where there was no sex either. So this was at a time before like I'd really learned meditation or breath work to circulate the energy. And so I'm like, the term that's used in like the 12-step rooms is like white knuckling, right? Like you're just kind of hanging on for dear life. You've got all this energy and this excitement. And during that 11-month period, all these times that I would have just pulled on that crank, that release valve, anytime I felt anxious or whatever, that energy now stayed inside of me. Sometimes I felt like a bottle of shook up Coca-Cola, just like ready to explode. But what ended up happening was, and this was life-changing, I started dreaming about leaving this really lucrative 15-year corporate career because like, it wasn't lighting my fire anymore, right? And I had these fantasies about starting my own business, becoming a speaker, being a coach. And in the past, I would have dreamt those things. And then the anxiety would have come up around not knowing how to do it. And then I would have jerked off and then let that energy go. Or I would have had sex or, now all that energy had nowhere to go. And so now, instead of like a Kleenex or a condom, that energy had to go into building something. And so what I started to do was I started to actually lay the bricks, the foundation, taking training courses, learning how to build a business online, launching an online video blog and then a blog and then incorporating my business. And then during that time made the decision to actually like leave. So I look at that 11-month period and I say, had I not gone through that, and I don't know if I'd be here today. And it gave me a new sense of understanding that this energy, this sexual energy is a man's life force, creative force. And we dispose it like without a thought. We just dump it everywhere without a thought. And you two talk about like speaking to a king, that's kingly energy. And I treat my seed now as kingly energy. And if I'm going to put it anywhere, like it's going to be with intention and it's going to be with a deeper sense of understanding of why it's leaving my body versus staying in here to build something, whether it's connection, intimacy, something with my business or workout. And that taught me to respect that energy at a whole different level.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so beautiful. The quote we have from you is, are you going to dump that life force into a Kleenex or are you going to fuck that life force into the world? And I think that's so beautifully illustrated in your story. And
I say some shit sometimes.
You say some shit. Write it down.
So now, like, because of that discovery and feeling like your sexual energy is your life energy, do you practice not ejaculating even when you have sex? You do.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And that's
so how often do you ejaculate now, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. What would you guess, Jade? If you had to put a number,
I would guess once a week. Is that
less?
Oh, wow.
About once a month. And I'm not always like that.
Yeah.
If you listen to Majic Chia wrote the book, The Orgasmic Man. He says a man in his 40s, and I'm 42 years old. He says, I think once a month is about the right amount of time. Now, your listeners may be like, that's crazy, right?
But it doesn't mean you're not orgasming. And a lot of people pair the two together.
Correct. There's and I know we want to get into that as well, because Majic Chia talks about there's a difference between ejaculation and orgasm. And most of us conflate the fact that when you ejaculate, which is when everything comes out, that's the orgasm. You can actually orgasm without ejaculation. This is actually not a state that I have been able to achieve because I haven't necessarily needed to practice. I haven't necessarily felt the desire to practice it. But if you were to squeeze, just kind of like if you're trying to stop your pee, as a man will understand this, like if you're taking a pee and you stop your pee and you squeeze the tip and you squeeze your perineum, that place between your I guess the taint area, right? While you're about to orgasm, you can actually breathe what would normally come out as ejaculation. You can actually breathe it up your spine. And that energy stays in your body, comes up your spine, up over your head, down the front. What I tend to do is like when I'm masturbating or if I'm having sex, I will breathe that energy all throughout my body. So it won't just get concentrated in my cock. I'll learn to breathe, to take these big breaths, which is also great for having total command and control over how long you last, choosing when or not to orgasm. And I've also found that with women, when I've been with partners, and I started doing this about 8 years ago, where like some women don't understand that I don't always want to ejaculate. They've become so accustomed to it that they think that I'm not being satisfied. And I've had to have conversations. I'm like, no, I'm not trying to race towards some outcome here. What I have learned is actually by withholding ejaculation, not only can I, go after it more and more often and keep that energy inside of me, I can now appreciate those little things about you, like how your body smells in different places, what your hair looks like when it falls down your back or across the pillow. I can hear the little sounds more different, like the sounds that you make when I hit your nipples versus your clitoris versus rubbing your feet. Like those little things when I'm not racing towards some outcome, now it's kind of all about like The Alchemist, that book, The Alchemist. It's about the
Mhm.
journey, not the destination. Like I can truly experience that.
Yeah.
And when she experiences that too, she wants that.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on this because I feel like a lot of listeners, especially our male listeners, may hear this idea of slowing down, which I think is a lot of what you're talking about here, like being able to slow down with those little moments or slow down enough with his own body in order to experience something else than the euphoria of the orgasm or searching for the orgasm. And I think that there's probably a lot of fear around changing their method, right? Like they already
Yes.
figured out the method of how to get to an orgasm. This is the best thing they ever discovered in life, that they can do it anytime really for themselves. So I want to know, is there a part of your story where there was like this moment where you overcame the fear, and how the fear of like, okay, I'm going to actually set this aside for a second and see if there is something else that I can do here. And maybe you already touched on that a little bit in the beginning of this talk, but yeah, does some like point come up where that fear was like, you had the fear you're looking in the face of the fear and you said, I'm going to try it a different way. I'm going to seek the edge here.
Yeah, Mercedes, you ask a really potent question here, because I think the fear that most men would have about breaking from routine is that they're going to go soft.
Yeah.
That's the big fear, especially when men who move very quickly. The fear is if I slow down, there's not going to be as much excitement. There's not going to be as much energy or sensation. And then I'm going to go soft. And when I go soft, I've either if I haven't gone soft, I'm afraid of what that's going to be like. Or if I've gone soft before, I've been ashamed. I've had someone say some stuff to me, right? That has caused me shame. And so I think that's the number one thing that we have to really talk about here first and foremost is one of the reasons why men don't want to change up their tempo or the thing that they know's worked or the program that they've run is because there's that fear that they will look bad or their performance will suffer. And that's a real concern. So my guidance for men who feel that fear is, let's talk about how you practice. And the number one practice, arena that you have is masturbation, self-stimulation. And like I shared before, I started masturbating at age 14.
Which you probably rushed through so you wouldn't get caught.
This is exactly it, Jade. It's like, if you think about how most men, I surveyed 50 guys at like about the first time they ever masturbated, right? And 80% of these men, so 40 of the 50 men, had their first experience between the ages of 11 and 14. Now I'm 42, and this group of guys were between the ages of, mostly were like 30 or 40s. I would posit that guys today are much younger than that. You may get guys who are even younger because porn, internet, these kinds of things. 11 years old is young. Like if you look at an 11-year-old and you're like, you're masturbating? Are you kidding me? And so if you think about a kid growing up in an environment, many who don't feel safe, like in their household, so you're doing it as quietly and as quickly as possible. And if you get as many reps in as I did, and I think I did like the math on that, I had 5,000 masturbation reps in before I actually like had physical contact, sexual contact with another human being. 5,000 reps of going fast, of going quiet without another human being, without talking to anyone about it. Like, what do we expect to have happen? Like, do we expect good things to come from that, right? How, especially like, when there's another human being involved later, like how am I supposed to know what her needs or desires are? How am I supposed to be aware of her pace, her tempo, these kinds of things? So yeah, I mean, like I would encourage every man who's kind of looking back at his past, like, how did you learn your pace, your tempo? How are you practicing now? And I had this great conversation with a guy who interviewed me on his podcast. He's 24 years old. His name is Jake. And he just had a sexual experience with a woman, like a new woman for the first time. And he popped off too quickly. He was embarrassed about it. He's like, what do I do? So I asked him, like, how are you masturbating right now? And how long does it take you when you jerk off? From point A to point B, 5 minutes. Well, how long does your sex last? 5 minutes. Okay. So let's take your practice sessions and let's start to slow it down. Let's start to elongate it. Let's start to, instead of going right in on the porn that you watch, like right in the heat of the gangbang, let's actually like maybe start with a little bit of touching, petting, like watch that warm up stuff, warm yourself up, commit to doing 10 or 15 minutes. Every time you get to the edge, like, right before you tip over, disengage, take some breaths, circulate the energy, allow yourself to go soft if that's what happens, re-engage. Like you actually need to start a new practice and work out some of those fears, like test yourself differently so that when you end up with a partner, you've already worked out some of the kinks, but you also may be able to communicate hey, I don't know about you, but I would love maybe to slow things down a little bit. I would love to focus on your pleasure. I'd love to enjoy more of you. I don't want to race towards any outcomes and leave you unsatisfied. And this is new for me. And I don't quite know how my body's going to respond. And I may go soft at times, and that's going to feel weird for me. And I don't want you to think it has anything to do with you. Are you down for something like that? And in my experience, like most men who have been able to communicate that to their partners, they're like, hell yes. How do I sign
Yeah.
up for that?
Yes, that really, really makes so
Takes
much
so much
sense.
vulnerability.
It does, but it's so powerful. That vulnerability is courage. It's what looks extremely brave to,
And it's
to
with
the women.
themselves, because we've said in past episodes, men aren't like, you hear pleasure practice and you think of women, you don't think of men,
Mhm.
So it's like vulnerable with themselves and then, with their partner.
Yeah. And brave, I think that's a really important word to
Mhm.
highlight here, because I think guys get so caught up in their own method and in needing to do it fast and stay in the performance mode or whatever. And they lose being in touch with themselves and their partner.
Mhm.
And, anyone who's taken any sports or even just been in the world of having to practice anything, we have a lot of MMA people who listen to our show. So whether it's jujitsu or Muay Thai or whatever it is, you've probably heard your coach say, perfect practice makes perfect, because it's true that the way you practice is going to be the way you act in life, or react in life or respond hopefully in life. Something I wanted to touch on and bring us back to that you spoke about when you were talking about how you kind of came to this slowing down was, well, you brought up your dreams, and that's what really stuck out to me, because you specifically said, and I don't know if it was your literal dreams or not, but we can get into that. You said you started dreaming about a bigger business or a different career, or like going a different direction entirely, and really maybe embodying your purpose and what you came here to do, or what your daemon was, has been guiding you to do. And it looks like it's very much to do with the work you're doing now. So I wanted to know, though, dreams specifically, I don't know if those are literal dreams or not, but during the time that you were not masturbating and during the time that you were having this really inward journey with yourself.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Did dreams come up for you?
Were they more vivid?
Yeah. Was there a change for you? Because this is something I've talked about a lot on the show. We talk about dream journaling a lot on the show. And dreams for me, like during ovulation, get hypersexual. So I just wonder for a man what the experience is there when you're not, you're not dumping that life force into a Kleenex.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. And by the way, if you two wanted to ever get into the conversation around the stages of the menstrual cycle and how men can play a role in that, one of our most popular episodes is actually the number one most downloaded episode on the Great Man Within podcast is A Man's Guide to the Menstrual Cycle.
Beautiful.
And it's been shocking, like the awareness that's brought to some of the sexual relationships that I've had, and also intimate relationships. So if you want to go there, happy.
I would love to. Yeah.
I would say when it comes to my dreams, like from a sleeping state, I've always had a difficult time hanging on to like the memory of them, right? Like they're vivid when they happen. And then like, as soon as I wake up, I have not cultivated the practice of like, journaling and remembering them. But one thing I will say that happened that had never happened before in my life that I do believe is a direct reflection of like keeping this energy in. I was just starting to learn things like meditation and practicing Buddhism. Well, I'd been disconnected from spirituality for 15 years. I grew up Catholic. I had a lot of animosity towards it. So I pushed it away, was spiritually homeless for 15 years. And then during recovery, I started taking on some of these deeper forms of meditation and Buddhism. This one day, I was doing a chanting meditation, and it's from Nietzsche in Buddhism. And for 15 minutes, I would sit with my hands folded, and I would chant over and over, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And I would set this intention of what I wanted for my life, and then to chant that with the force of galloping horses. So I would do it really powerfully. And it took a while for me to build up the endurance to keep that chant for 15 minutes with that power of galloping horses. And during this one chanting experience, I was envisioning breaking free from the shackles of my corporate life and then going off on my own, right? And what ended up happening was, and this was during the 11-month period of celibacy, this electricity like entered my body in a way that I'd never experienced before. And you have to understand here, I was still at that point in time where if anyone were to have told me like electricity entered their body or like they talked to angels and they had this, like I would laugh at you, like I would have put you down. That's what my mindset was back then. So now I'm experiencing the very thing that I deemed impossible, that I looked at other people like they were crazy. There was this electricity in my body, And all of a sudden, these flashes, these images that were, you know, similar to dream state of like this cage, boom, breaking free from it, shackles, chains, bang, and leaving this corporate world, blazing this trail as my own renegade, right? As an entrepreneur. And as that was happening, that like sunk into my being at a deep level, where this one thought, though, about 15 minutes in, this one thought floated into my mind, and it said, yeah, but you can never make as much money doing that as what you're making now. And the electricity, like a circuit breaker, bang, turned off. All of the energy left my body. And I came to, and I was just like, whoa, what the hell was that? And I kind of just chalked those 15 minutes up to well, that was kind of a cool experience. And I accepted that limiting thought as a truth, you know, like, oh, yeah, you're right. I can never make as much money. So for 6 months, I just kind of walked around, not really doing much other than feeling like that fantasy was something interesting, but a seed was growing inside of me. 6 months later, I was chanting again, had the same feeling, the same electricity came back, saw all the same visions. That thought comes floating in again. Yeah, but you could never make as much money doing that as what you're doing right now. But my meditation practice, my awareness practice had deepened, and I caught that thought. And I was like, who the fuck says? And I pushed that off, and I was like, well, what if I could make 10 times as much money? And the electricity kept going. And I didn't know how I could make 10 times as much money. I couldn't see that, but like I just kept the electricity going. And when that session was done, those visions were clear as day. The knowing was deep inside of me. The how I was going to do it was light years off. And I didn't need to know the how. I just had to have the feeling. And that was the day that I made the decision that I'm going to be leaving this 15-year career. And everything after that was like letting the mystery unfold of how.
Ooh, I can feel it. That's
Yeah.
really-
one of my intuitives says that also, that when a man is having sex, it's like releases him from feeling his feelings. And so when he's like abstaining, that he like gets really clear on his feelings. And I have another friend that when he did a year celibacy, he said like, he wasn't masturbating or anything, but he would feel his feelings so much that this is how he put it, that he would like feel almost like orgasms in his heart. And I think maybe it was just, he was a sex addict prior, so he just wasn't used to feeling, you know? And I know for me, when I did my celibacy, I just felt very in my body. So
I love too that you walked us into that story with this, you painted that picture of growing up in a very Catholic family and then resisting that, which I think is such a common route for a lot of people, I know myself included. And then you had this period of what you called spiritual homelessness, which I'm going to use, I love.
Yeah.
Where you were kind of, I don't even know if would you say you were soul searching, or you were just kind of floating about? And
then
the
opposite of soul searching. Yeah.
You were like rejecting, right? Soul rejecting.
Yeah. Yes.
So then you come about this practice of meditation and these different modalities of really getting back to spirituality. Maybe I don't know how you would phrase it today, but I think that's so beautiful that then you're having this very spiritual experience with yourself and your soul, where you have this moment of electricity and you witness all these things happening. I just love how we have to pendulum swing. You know, we have to go sometimes from maybe a methodology that isn't suited to us in our life, like Catholicism might not have been, or the way that it was being shown to you in the moment when you were younger. And then we have to swing all the way away from it and bounce off the other side to find our center.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And I mean, Jade, this is probably what you experienced when you did your year of celibacy, right? Is kind of those out of balance, you know, these swings. And I think it's the Buddhists who say like the middle path is ultimately what we end up striving for, right? Like, so we don't have to, if you think about someone who's running, if someone's like swinging their arms way to the side, like you are inefficient, right? You are not winning a sprint. It's the one who can like go straight forward. So sometimes though, Mercedes, you're right. Like we have to go through these radical out of balance experiences to understand where is the center. And that's why I do think things like periods of abstinence, temporary periods of abstinence, whether it's around alcohol, sex, masturbation, you know, watching television, are extremely helpful because they do allow you to understand like why you have such a troubling relationship with those things to begin with. You know, like it'll show you those micro moments that lead to the thought or the feeling that leads to that action that's troubling. And, you know, Mercedes, to go back to your point about like, you know, growing up in this household, I think it's important to note, especially for your listeners, like to really inspect the forces that shaped your sexuality at an early age. and we talk about this on the podcast, it's, three key forces are your faith, your family, your friends. And then there's also the fourth one, which is porn, and we could talk all too, but, faith or lack thereof, my faith early on was Catholicism, 7 years of Catholic school, altar boy. And my particular faith taught me that like premarital sex or sexual desire, you're going to hell. That's scary.
Yeah.
My family and our household, my parents are amazingly loving people, but they didn't know how to have the sex conversation. They were the kinds of parents that if we were watching a movie on Friday night and like there would be a woman and a man kissing on television, her top would be coming off, they would lunge across the couch and like try to cover my eyes. They'd be like, no. And then for the next 10 minutes, the collective sphincter of the room would tighten. And it was just this really uncomfortable feeling. But at the same time, I felt this like I wanted to see that, look at her. And at the same time, feeling like there was something wrong or bad about it, this conflation of this ambivalence of this natural, powerful force of energy that is clean, that is natural, is automatically labeled bad. And we can see how these judgments around sexual energy can create ticking time bombs. Recently, and I don't know when this podcast is going to air, but a week ago, by the time of this recording, Robert Aaron Long was the man who went and killed 8 people in Atlanta, Georgia, 6 Asian American women or Asian women at the massage parlors outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And there's a big part of his story that, that he's a sex addict. But one of the pieces that is not getting talked about enough is that the church that he belonged to had strict, rigid, oppressive beliefs around sexual desire. And if you have sexual desire, then that's the devil. They classify having sex outside of your marriage, homosexual behavior, transgender, along the same lines as pedophilia, incest, bestiality. Like that's how rigid they are. And what I can tell you is from being in 4 years of Sex Addicts Anonymous, the rooms are filled with men who grew up in rigid, oppressive, fear-inducing, shame-inducing sexual beliefs or had home lives that rejected sexuality. And so we grow up with that feeling and it's made wrong, which creates an ambivalence, which leads to self-loathing. And if self-loathing has enough pressure over time, turns to self-hatred. And if that goes on for too long, then one of two things happen. A man will implode on himself or he will explode on the world. And we saw what happened with Robert Aaron Long. He exploded and took the lives of 8 innocent civilians. So I don't know how I got here, and I'm sorry if I went way off track, but I think the point here is we have to understand the judgments that we've placed on ourselves and where do we learn that? And if it's here today, let's do the work to unremember that stuff because sprinkling a little bit of love on anything makes it better.
Yeah. And shame is such a big factor in there, especially with the church and things we're talking about here. And something beautiful that got said to me recently was that shame is always a lie. So if you feel shame, and in other words, if you feel that part of you is bad or that you are innately bad somehow, that's shame in action. And it's always a lie. There can be guilt, which is something you did might have been bad, and that is recoverable. You can go back and change that thing. You can go apologize or whatever you need to do. But shame is always a lie. So if it comes from the dogma you grew up in, if it comes from a partner you were with who was projecting their own shame probably onto you, or any other way that you got some shame on you, just know that it's a lie. And it's a story that you can rewrite. It's a fairy tale, but not the good kind.
Yeah.
100%.
And that's a good transition into our next topic.
Yeah. So we want to go into dick size shame with you.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting topic because I feel like we've talked about it on the show before amongst just Jade and I, but really it hasn't been something we've been able to talk specifically with a man about. So I love to feel what you have to say here and really get into that, jokes in the locker room, a woman asking if it's in or not after you've already entered her. Dick size has got to affect a man's self-worth. And I'm sure it's probably usually is something that triggers on top of something that comes from childhood, even there's places you can dig into where this all stems from. How does he start to identify that shame and then heal it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe I would love to ask you two a few questions too. Just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so let me start by answering your questions first. From my own personal experience, growing up, again, 42 years old, didn't have access to high speed porn or internet, like that kind of thing. And for most of my formative years, like I only had access to seeing my own penis. And I happen to love my penis and didn't really have a basis comparison. It was just not a thing. It was only when, maybe I went to college and I had some like free time, free space, high speed internet, and porn was more available that I started to watch porn and see like all these other penises that were way bigger than mine. Like the average dick size that you see in a porn video is 8 inches. Mine's not. And many times is often bigger than that. And so it started to call into question, like, wow, how come I'm not that big, or how come I'm not that thick? And I know that there are a lot of men who have similar experiences, especially the younger generations who grew up, like from right around 9 or 10 years old, you're probably seeing dicks on video. And one of my friends is Lisa Ann, who is like one of the top 10 most downloaded porn stars. Even today, she's no longer a porn star. She gives me a lot of behind the scenes stuff around pornography. And she says that she's had kids like 8 to 12 years old emailing her because they found her like on their Xboxes. There's like a pop-up ad that leads to porn, and they're learning about their dicks, through watching porn, and she's just like, blown away by that. So I think it's porn is one of them. You nailed it, Mercedes. Like a locker room is definitely another thing. Like I remember one of my earliest experiences with that was freshman high school football. We would do these 2-a-days, and then, you'd end up in the showers and you'd see all these guys with dicks. And at the time you didn't, all these guys with dicks. Like I didn't know about the, like the grower or the shower. So if guys don't know about this, like either you're a grower or a shower, which means in your flaccid state, if you are a grower, then that means like you typically present smaller than you actually are. And it's like when the blood flows, then like you kind of move out to your full length, but it may look like you're small. Showers just seem to hang longer when they're in their flaccid state and don't fill up as much, as like, but if you're like in a shower with a whole bunch of showers and you're a grower, you may naturally think you've got a small dick, right? I just interviewed a guy on my podcast. His name is Jason Gaddis. He runs the Relationship School. And he wrote an article 5 years ago that went viral, which was called A Letter to My Cock. And he had an experience from an early age, I think 11 or 12 years old, where I guess a couple of older guys in the neighborhood, like they all pulled their pants down and he was the small one. He's a grower. And for his whole life, he was just, he got shamed. Other guys like made fun of his dick. For his whole life, he thought he had a small dick. There was a story about it. He doesn't. He was just he's a grower. And it took him until like his, I don't know, early 40s. He like for 25 years, this man walked around into every sexual relationship thinking he had a small dick. So I think maybe one more thing I'll say on this and then I'll pause because sometimes I get really like wound. But Esther Perel, who's like the number one, I would say, at least in my eyes, the sex and intimacy relationship therapist in the world, talks about how like the number one problem that men face today is shame. And when it comes to masculinity, men don't understand that like masculinity is this thing that we're not just given. It's something that we have to earn. Femininity is not something that like women have to earn. It's kind of like, like you're a feminine being. It's not like you get your feminine card pulled from you, but men constantly have to earn their masculine card, their man card. And it can be stripped from them. If we don't finish our beer in front of our group of buddies, we're a pussy. If we order the petite filet at dinner, if our dick goes soft or if our dick is too small. And when a man has too small of a dick, we get emasculated. Therefore, we're no longer a man. And then our identity is shattered. Like this is where the shame comes from. And a guy can carry that around into every sexual relationship that he has, which really can make it challenging. And I've heard some heartbreaking stories from the men in our community who have smaller penises, micro penises, who have been told by women, I can't feel that it's in, like that kind of thing. And it can be really heartbreaking because what does a guy do about that?
Yeah.
So what does a guy do about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've had conversations with some great sex educators on our podcast is we have reduced sex to this penetrative act, like dick in anus, dick in vagina. Like it has to be, especially for men, like a penis has to be going somewhere. Whereas that's just like a fraction of the landscape, right? We've got hands, we've got fingers, we've got tongues, we've got mouths. There is so much more to the sexual landscape than just the penis. And for a guy who, let's say, maybe doesn't have a big dick and maybe with his partner is unable to fully satisfy the partner with the size of his penis, great. This is your opportunity to become like magnificent in learning all the other parts of that person's body. You can start to ask deeper questions around where they like to be touched, figure out their erogenous zones, create environments where you don't have to use your penis to deliver sexual pleasure. Get really curious about how your mouth and your tongue work and the parts of their bodies that, that light them up, and invite that person into a broader awareness of their own sexuality, because that partner may have reduced it to sexual penetration also. And it's like, what else would feel good? Here's one thing. Let's sit down today for a half an hour. Let me lay you down for a half an hour today. And there's going to be no penetration with my penis, but I'm just going to explore your body for the next half hour. Are you open to that? And then, you tell me as I go to different parts of your body, is it a green light, a yellow light? Is it a red light? Do you want more of it? Do you want harder, softer, faster, slower? And let's just explore what else is available. And I think that the reason why this gives me faith is we interviewed a woman named Shayna James on our podcast. She runs the Man Alive podcast. And she interviewed a couple where the man went impotent for life, Like talk about my worst, fear, right? Like this man's penis no longer can get hard. And he said that saved his sex life with his wife because they then had to explore all of the other areas that they'd shut off, and their sex life is thriving now. And they can use toys and other things like that. And he can please the fuck out of her without having a hard dick ever.
Right.
So maybe go check that episode out too.
Yeah, that's a beautiful inspiration too. It brings up, well, that story, not specifically, but just what we were talking about here, brings up, I guess, the question of how much of this idea of I have to have a certain size penis in order to satisfy a woman, or in order to satisfy myself with a woman, if I'm a man, is a story that's been told in society versus some sort of primal or instinctual part of being a man. You know what I mean?
That's a total story. I mean, like, where does it come from? Like I said before, I mean,
from porn.
Yeah. Right. Like 18 years, I didn't know anything different. And I was thrilled with my, like never even thought to question it. And then it was only like when the porn thing entered the world, and did I start to look at this misrepresentation of penis size and just started to question and ask, different things. So I believe it's totally story. Now, listen, there are women who are naturally inclined to love bigger dicks. Absolutely. Like I know a number of women who want that. I know a number of women who couldn't care less about the size of a penis, as long as like there's a man who's attentive, who knows how to hit different spots. And I think this could be really kind of interesting to get into, maybe to flip the script here and ask the two of you, like, if you were to kind of go back through your own sexual histories, what role did penis size have in like your lives? And was there an expectation is there an expectation, or were there certain kind of desires that you had for the size of a penis? Or did you come encounter with a really small one once and not know how to like, what are some of your two experiences in that respect?
Yeah, I love this question because I think it does vary so much, person to person. I think so I'm going to answer this question a little backwards. So I think at the end of the day, if any woman was to dig deep and be conscious with her own truth, I might be just projecting all over all women right now, but I'm going to do it anyway. She would probably say that I would much rather choose a conscious man attached to a small penis rather than an unconscious man attached to a large penis. Because, you've heard, the motion of the ocean, not the size of the fish. I don't know how the saying goes. Yeah. Size of the ship, maybe. So yeah, we definitely, I think as women, and I'll speak for myself, I definitely want a person who's going to be present and attentive with me over everything else. However, I do think that there is this piece of the story that is important to touch on too, where you can talk about it like how men may think about boob size, for instance, although boobs have much less of a role play in insertion in any way, like a dick, has this other thing that happens and children come from it. But boob size versus dick size, right? Like that's a conversation that I think is interesting as well. So I think there is this,
because like men are allowed to like big and small, right?
Yeah. And do we rob women from saying like, I like the pain of a big dick? Or, when we say, well, we have to take this story all the way down to the the roots and figure out what's really going on here. So I think there's a lot of layers here. And so from my personal experience, I think I've been with different sizes, and it hasn't been as much about the size where I ever was like, oh, this is never going to work for me. I've never said that to myself, even with a small penis or with a large penis. I've never been like, I'm not going to do this, but it's been a inner conversation with myself a lot. Like, I mean, this is a thing that I think for me, maybe more than a lot of women that I know, has been almost an obsession where like a big penis excites something in me that I have come to try to delineate where that spawns from. So for me, I don't know that it's like one particular instance, but I think it is something where my experience of our culture, even before porn, has been this like, we praise phallic symbology in our culture a lot of the time, and many cultures actually. This is this phallic symbology of like the large, even like you'll see a statue of a large phallic looking, thing for a tribe, that this is the thing that they usually put up during the summertime months when it's about bringing plentiful bounty to their harvest, right? And you'll have this phallic symbolization. So I don't know how much of that, I was conscious of growing up, but I know that it definitely seeped in somewhere along the lines. Do you have a question, Dom? You look like you want to.
Yeah. Do you mind if this gets too personal, then like you just stop me here. Right.
Sure.
So the two of you obviously gravitate towards MMA, right? Where there's a lot of like energy, there's a lot of masculine force, there's a lot of power, right? So there's some clues there, right? Around like what you two gravitate towards. And then Mercedes, would it be fair to say that it might take some work for you to surrender fully into your feminine with a man, right? There's got to be some level of like masculine aggressive, but the conscious that allows you to drop back into your feminine and fully surrender.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I would say I am more masculine usually. Like I've always attracted more feminine men, and I usually stand in that masculine role more often.
Right. And that can be exhausting for women who maybe have, like, if at your essence, Mercedes, if at your essence, there is a desire to be in your feminine, then maybe one of those elements that pushes you there is like when you feel dominated by a big dick, right? There's a fullness there. And if you are used to being if you're used to out masculinating other men, then having that, like maybe a bigger guy, do you go for like bigger guys who are like physically bigger than you?
Yeah, I normally would. I mean, I'm married now and my husband isn't actually a huge guy, but normally what we're talking about is my trajectory here of dating men, always dated big football player type of guys. So
yeah. And so like, it might have something to do with this craving, this longing to be deeper in your feminine. And that's just like one more element that allows you to surrender into it.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense.
And I love a lot of sense
that you put it into that context for me. That really does resonate for sure. And I'd say that idea of, it's so funny how the subconscious like works stuff out for you. It's like, look, here's what's going to make this thing that you're trying to fix in yourself a little bit easier with, by bringing in this type of partner. So anyway, yeah, I guess that is a large part of where that might have grown for me. And I wouldn't say I'm still in that mode now, but I still see it in me. You know what I mean? If I'm just being open and honest about where I am, like it's still something that is exciting for me, or is a fetish, if you want to call it that, or something I'm drawn toward.
Yeah. And there's nothing, and Jade, I want to come to you too, because I think your listeners would love, to get this, like this side of you as well, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, right, Mercedes? It's just like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with men who like big breasts. It's also the way we talk about it. If we only idealize the big breasts, then we marginalize those who don't. If we only idolize the big dick, then we make others insecure about the size of their penises. And there was one more thing I wanted to say about this. The difference between the boobs and the dick is that, like, we can clearly see if you have big breasts or not. It's not a mystery. The penis is, it's kind of like there's like this moment of reveal. And if like you're someone who like wants it, who craves a certain size penis, you don't know until you've already made the commitment to getting there. And there's something about that that's both exciting, but also nerve-wracking, right? For both sides, because let's just say, like, if you're a woman who can either only be satisfied with a big penis or just like is looking for that, you've got to kind of go all the way, or maybe ask someone, before it happens. Whereas if you're a man who, or you're someone who like a person who likes big breasts, you figure that out right like that.
Right.
So, I don't know how we get around that until maybe there's a day that we get less.
Was that the dick pic epidemic? Is that where that's born? I mean, what is that about?
I don't know. I mean, the dick epidemic is like, I don't like, we all seem to be just fascinated by our dicks.
Yeah.
It's just like, I love my dick and I want you to love it too, And so it's like, here's mine. And, you're talking about the phallic statues just kind of like being built. It's like, I want to build a statue that I want people to salute to. So I think we as guys just want our penises saluted, and that rarely.
I do love that we have really come to, well, for me, it's a semi-revelation here of seeing dick size as a symbol of overt masculinity or masculine energy even. And in a conscious person, knowing that that's something that you might be making a story around, being able to dilute that down into what it really is, because that opens up a huge opportunity to be able to say, okay, dick size obviously doesn't indicate whether you have masculine energy or, you're able to stand in the masculine and be energetically agile and these type of things. That's a story. And a man with any dick size could be a very masculine man, of course. So I don't know. I think for anyone listening who is wondering how do they navigate their own insecurities around dick size and masculinity, if it's related, because for me, I love how we pulled out where that's related for me. So it's not related. It's a story. I just want to underline that.
Yeah. Thank you. And Jade, I would love to hear your perspective on it too.
Yeah. I'm curious if maybe it's because you talked about for men, it's like the first penises y'all see happen to be in porn. And so you tend to think that they're big or that they should be big or because for me, my first sexual experience, because I never watched porn prior to sex and then had a really religious background, waited till marriage. And my first experience with sex was with an uncircumcised man that wasn't very big. And so for me, after that, it was the larger ones that scared me, kind of. Like I remember the largest one I saw, I refused to have sex with him because I was scared it would hurt. So I avoided it and, did all the other things. But I will say that the two largest sexual partners that I have had were the least enjoyable, not because of the size, but because the sex was just not great. It was almost like maybe they thought because of their size that they didn't have to do anything else or try, anything else. And I will say that also the more average to smaller sizes felt better to me because it seemed like something about that size hit my G spot in a different way. Yeah. So I preferred that. And also it's like no position hurt, and so I always lean towards that. And I don't know if that has something to do with my very first sexual experience being, like that. But also I will say that I never went into sex thinking that they may be feeling insecure about their size. I was always feeling so insecure about things on my body. Like in my 20s is when I felt like all my friends started to get fake boobs. And it was like, I felt like most men were talking about like how beautiful fake boobs were. And so because even though mine are double D, even because they were natural and didn't just sit still, I felt very self-conscious about my boobs. And then I also felt, because I have a larger labia, I was always really nervous for people to see it, actually I was more nervous for women to see it than men, because men, I was they probably haven't seen as many as women have seen. And I remember one time being in a car and the girls in the back seat were looking up this porn star and they were like, what the hell happened to her labia? And making fun of her. And I looked at it and it looked like mine. So I felt so much shame. And I also had girls make fun of boobs being, super big in high school. Cause I was a double D by 8th grade. So people would call it gross or, so I had so much shame around my own body that it never occurred to me that men were feeling any shame on theirs. I was just trying to stay in the dark, on my own. So
yeah, I mean, this is such a beautiful conversation. I can imagine the men who are listening to this, and even all people who are listening to this right now can feel really heard about the insecurities that you've experienced, that first experience. And I've heard so many of those first experiences that women have had, what if the first dick was really big, had a big impact on either they wanted that from that point on, or they never wanted something like that ever again. It's that first experience does kind of create some sort of imprint in many cases, not all. And Jade, my heart opened up to hear about your insecurities. Like, you're like, man, I didn't even know these guys were bringing theirs because I was so worried about my own. And let's just talk about like women's labia for a minute here, if we can.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how many women have that insecurity, because like there are so many porn stars who have that labia surgery that make like, the one size fits all.
Yeah, I had
vagina.
considered it. So
Yeah. Did you? And
Yeah.
what made you ultimately end up deciding to stick?
Well, first of all, I was afraid I would hurt. That was like the main thing.
Probably
But
would. Yeah.
yeah, but also I felt like it was an opportunity to love myself more. And I remember the first time that I really stepped into that, I took MDMA by myself and just like stood nude in front of a mirror and like did some affirmations towards myself. And that was when I really was like, I don't care if my boobs, look weird when I lean to the side or something like that. And I remember just feeling accepting of it. And so I don't know that if I hadn't done MDMA that time and did that practice, if I would have gotten the surgery, but it was something that I at least looked up and like figured out how much it was going to cost and things like that, just because I felt so just the shame is the right word. But I remember the very first partner I talked to about it acted weird about it too. And so it made me feel like I was going to be with him for a while. So it made me feel like I had to get it for him. It wasn't really so much for me.
Thank goodness that like you didn't do that just because of him, like his inability to have that's why it's so important for people to have grown up conversations around this. And, I had a partner a few years ago who her sister had shamed her for her labia, like, and like she has full meaty labia, and I loved it. Like I thought her pussy was beautiful, but she had so much shame around it that it took like months for like her to believe me, like when I would get in there and dig in and like, and take time and there were times where she just wanted to like pull my head out and move on to something else because it was like so deeply entrenched. So we've all on some level got these insecurities. And I think if we're going back to where we started around this, like dick shame, dick size stuff, it's having the conversations about it, opening up, recognizing, I think Mercedes, what you said, like that shame is always a lie. It's always a lie. And recognizing, okay, like I've been given this thing. This is like for this life, this is the dick that I've been given. And how am I going to work with it? And how am I going to have conversations about it? How am I going to learn to love it? That's the game that we're playing right now.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff. We talk about cutting off parts of our body, and it brought to mind circumcision for men and how, women,
there's shame around that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So much shame around that. And it's such it's madness. It's honestly like, it's basically insane at some level where we decide to cut off the most sensitive part of our body. I don't know if you have something to speak to that, have anything you want to speak to on that, but that is something we have brought up a few times here in this space. And I think it's important that we're talking about it. So yeah.
I think it's something I could probably get more well-versed in and do more research on, but I am circumcised. And I didn't even really think about it for most of my life, just because it was just what was the choice that was made for me. Most of the penises I ever saw, in porn were circumcised. And I remember the first time encountering an uncircumcised penis on porn, I'm like, what the fuck's wrong with that penis? That was like my first interaction. That was my first reaction, was like, what the fuck's wrong with that? Because I'd never seen an uncircumcised penis. So I don't know why we circumcise penises. I think maybe at some point in time maybe they thought it was like for health reasons, and then maybe it was religious reasons after that. But like now that we have greater information around like cleanliness and hygiene, those health concerns no longer exist. I certainly don't know if that choice should be made for a child, like if a man later on in life chooses to circumcise his penis, that probably should be his choice. So if like the baby is not at imminent risk or a danger, like why is that choice made for that child? So I don't know if I have a lot more to say about that, Mercedes, because like I haven't really, I tend not to hold strong opinions about things I haven't thought about deeply. And so, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, it's just, one of those things that I know men hold so much shame around, whether circumcised or uncircumcised now, because there's this crossover conversation that's currently happening, and women who circumcise their child and then later realize that, they have some other realization later, and then they have shame. So there's just so many layers of this that I think is really all coming together now. And I'm sure it's going to coalesce into hopefully progress and growth here. Anyway, we have some episodes where we discussed it, especially one with River Roaring. I don't know the number episode at the top
and Lorraine
of my head.
Crin. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm curious if you have anything to offer for like maybe we're with a partner who's insecure about their penis size or about their labia size. Like if there's anything the partner can do that can maybe ease that anxiety. Because I don't, even if they've like healed the shame, I think there's still this feeling of like nervousness that comes up at times, you know? I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, penis size, I mean, this could also be wrapped into conversation around sexual performance too. I think, I mean, you all asked the question in advance of this about some surveys that I had done. I remember, so if it's okay, I can wrap those two together.
Yeah, sure.
I asked these two questions to my Instagram following. And one of them was, I asked the women, have you ever been in a sexual situation with a man or a person with a penis where he was unable to get or lost an erection? And 83% of the respondents said yes, right? So 83% of people have been with someone who's either unable to get an erection or lost the erection. So those are typically like shaming moments, right? Like men feel shame, and people with penises feel shame in that moment. And the second question was, did you feel as if it had something to do with you, even if it was just a little? And I'm curious.
I always did. I always thought it was something I wasn't turning them on. I never thought it was anything that they could control.
Yeah, absolutely. Even up until like just a couple of years ago, and when we started doing this type of work, I definitely felt like it was me. I never shamed someone for it, but that I could totally see how you could easily turn on that insecurity in yourself and self-worth, worthiness wound, and then project it onto your partner in that moment and be like, oh, it's your, you take all this shame that I'm holding actually in my own being about my own insecurities.
Right. Now think about that. Now there are two people lying in bed who both feel ashamed, trying to communicate with one another.
Right. Closed. Completely closed.
Totally. That's a recipe for disaster. And I remember, so I'll just share a story with my life. Like most of my life, I was really lucky around like sexual performance. It was just never a thing that I had to worry about. And a few years ago, as I started to heal my sexuality, like it was no longer compulsive, some things started to shift. One of the things that like I used to be able to do was like, I would create these seductive experiences with women who didn't live in the same city as me. We would have like this courtship going on. And then like in my mind, I would have like this sexual picture of who she was. And then when like we got together, I was going to have sex with that vision of her, not actually like what was there in its entirety. And even if like a woman would show up that maybe didn't look the way I expected her to, or like, the energy wasn't there, I could still like execute on it. And then after it was done, I would feel the disconnect after it was done. Once I healed that, then the energy of that person became much more prominent. I no longer had that like, fantasy thing. So there was a woman who was here who we'd had this courtship, and I was following my same pattern, and I could feel that like I wasn't all that excited, but I just kept going with it as I normally did, the program. And we're in my bedroom and we're kissing, that petting's going on, where things are happening. And I can feel this moment where like her hand starts in my chest and it's beginning the migration down slowly. And I know where it's headed. And I am as flaccid at like as unturned. I'm not talking like a half chub. I'm talking just like completely flaccid. And the hand is moving down. And I'm like, holy shit. For the first time, like for the first time, a woman is going to feel my dick unaroused. And I'm like, do I stop this? Do I turn over? And something in me said, just like, let it happen. And she put her hand down and she starts touching my flaccid penis and she's flopping it around and it's not getting excited. And then she disengages and she looks back at me and her face is pale. And I'll never forget, it's just like seared into my memory. And she blinks a few times. And the two words that left her lips that I teach like all partners of men to never say in a moment like this: what's wrong?
I knew you were going to say that.
Because that tends to be the reaction. It's like, oh, flaccid dick, there's something wrong. Like there's something wrong. Why does a flaccid penis have to be wrong? Right. And I backpedaled. I was all freaked out. I didn't know what to, I'm just, I didn't have words for it. I felt ashamed. She also thought it was something to do with her. And fortunately, like I had some techniques, I had some breathing. I was able to be like, listen, I don't know what's going on right now. I'm not feeling like activation down here. Why don't I just turn the attention on you? And, I was able to move through some stuff. I ended up going down on her. I found my mojo and I was able to get back into that moment. But I think in those moments, the thing that I want to let the partners know is first of all, it has nothing to do with you. It truly has like nothing to do with you. There's something going on inside that, like inside the man, where either he's nervous, he's going through something, he's not fully aroused yet. Maybe there's like, some warm up that needs to happen for him that hasn't happened yet. And if you can recognize that it's not anything to do with like your body or your attractiveness, that he's going through something, then you can kind of take a deep breath and hold that space for him. And a number of the women who responded said, well, what I did was I loved on that soft dick the same way I would have loved on a hard dick, or like, what else could I, hey, maybe I'll start touching another part of your body that feels good for you. That especially helped the men who were emotionally kind of stuck and didn't know how to talk about it, to just either relax. Some of them got back into it, some of them didn't, but they could feel safe in their partner's arms.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, like in our 20s, the wind blows and a guy gets hard. So it's like we get so used to that then in our 30s and 40s, when it's harder for a man to get turned on, we're not used to that yet, and I think with age comes stress, hormonal things, diet, like so many things. Whereas like in 20s, it's like you hardly have to try. So I think it's just adjusting our mindset there too.
100%. And that kind of goes back to the dick size conversation too.
Mm-hmm.
It's if a man is feeling, a person with a penis is feeling that they're ashamed of the size and they've expressed that to you, then I think some of the things that can be done is like maybe in a non-sexual situation, just like kind of sitting down, looking deeply into that person's eyes and just being like, do you know I love your penis? And what's attached to it? Like, or do you know that like your penis, if you're not in love with this person, do you know that your penis is like, I'm happy with your penis and the person that's attached to it. And maybe even create kind of like I said before, a specific container where it's like, hey, for half an hour, I'm just going to play with your penis. And, maybe while I'm playing with it, if anything comes up for you, around an insecurity, let's just talk about it. Or let's just let it come up and let it go. And I'll smile at you and I'll blast some love at it. And those could be the things that it may take time. It may take multiple situations for that to kind of overcome, but to create a space where a guy can feel it's okay can lead to some real healing.
Yeah, I love that. And it brings up, like in the world of Tantra, I guess, like using yoni massage and lingam massage and giving a space, like creating a appointment and a space and that opportunity it's okay. Like some of the techniques are not going to be the thing that makes you super rock hard. They're going to be just, weirdly massaging your penis. She's going to be just, handling it in a way that isn't the thing that's going to be like, getting you to have an orgasm, but it's going to be gentle and for your pleasure, just in a different way. And I think experimenting with things like that, it's all about making that container feel really safe for it to be flaccid sometimes. And it, to play, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. This is about correcting the practice, right?
Yeah.
Totally.
And that makes me want to ask you too. I know you've already shared some, but if there was anything that you wanted to share about ways men can upgrade their sex life.